zoomed out. Okay. Good afternoon, good evening. This is Joan coming to you from Joan's Kitchen, and today we are going to be making a curried chicken and apple salad that is from Marshall Field's, which is a department store from my hometown of Chicago. I have all the ingredients laid out. This is going to have chicken. Today I'm using some poached chicken breasts. It has whipped cream, it has chutney, it has mayonnaise, it has Dijon mustard, a little bit of curry powder, some apple, some green onions. I've already cut the tops off the green onions, and some celery. This is a recipe that I actually got when I was in the store many years ago with my son. They used to have a really great cookware section, and they used to do a lot of cooking demonstrations. I say used to because Marshall Field's technically is not Marshall Field's anymore. It was bought by Macy's several years ago, so now it's Macy's. And they don't have quite the same services that they used to when it was Marshall Field's. But I was in Marshall Field's with my son, and there was a lady who was demonstrating this recipe and giving out bowlfuls of it. And it was really, really delicious. It's easy to make. The exotic ingredients are not really that exotic. The chutney you can get in the grocery store, and curry powder you get in the spice section. And I'm going to be talking about those ingredients as well. Chicken salad is kind of an American classic recipe. I did a little bit of research on it, and chicken salad, it's documented going back into the 1800s, and it seemed like it was a way to use leftover meat or fowl being chicken or poultry, and it was bound together by mayonnaise. There's all kinds of variations on chicken salad. Typical ingredients in chicken salad include things like raisins, typically celery, onions, definitely mayo to bind it together, and then any other kind of condiments or seasonings to kind of punch it up. So this one is a little bit unique because of using the curry and the chutney, which are kind of associated with Indian food, but also kind of not really, and I'm going to get into that. I also wanted to mention I'm using poached chicken breast today, but you can also use rotisserie chicken. I made a batch yesterday, and I needed 2 rotisserie chickens with the meat stripped off the bones in order to have enough chicken to make the recipe. And I want to talk about a couple of other things. When you get rotisserie chicken, if you're taking the meat off the bones, save the skin and all the bones and throw it into a stock pot. Put in an onion cut in half. You can leave the skin on because that'll give the stock a really nice color. Take a couple of carrots, just break those up and throw them in. A couple of pieces of celery, throw those in. A couple of bay leaves, maybe a couple of garlic cloves, and just let it simmer on a back burner, and you'll end up with lovely chicken stock. I probably have a couple gallons of chicken stock that I made from the bones and the skin from the 2 rotisserie chickens that I used when I made this ahead of time yesterday. As far as the poached chicken breast, poaching chicken breast is kind of the classic way to prepare the meat for a chicken salad, and it's really easy to poach chicken breasts. You just take the whole chicken breast. The ones that I used were boneless, skinless chicken breasts like this, and you put them in a pan, you put them in a single layer and put enough water in to cover with about 1 inch to spare, and you can put in a little bit of seasoning with that. Today I put in just a couple of bay leaves and some dried thyme and a couple of cloves of garlic. You bring the pot to a boil, and then you just, once it comes to a boil, you let it simmer. It usually takes maybe about 15 minutes for the chicken breast to be done. You want to reach an internal temperature of about 160 degrees. So with that said, I'm going to get started, and I would like to remind you that if you have any questions along the way, to please ask, and I will try to answer them. And if you're watching this on a recording rather than the live broadcast, just pop your questions into the comment box. I do monitor those, and I will do my best to answer them. Also, as far as the recipe, when this is done, I will put a link into the post that you can use to request the recipe. When you do this, I will subscribe you to my email list. I send out a newsletter weekly that has food inspirations, always a recipe. I actually put the videos of the recipes that I'm making every week. And then I also have some travel inspiration. I mean, right now we really can't travel, but I'm still trying to stay inspired about places that I'd like to go or that you might want to go when we are able to travel again. So that said, I'm going to go ahead and get started. The whipping cream for this recipe is actually whipped, and I've taken the liberty of whipping it in advance just so that I wouldn't have to have the mixer going or take the time. And it's whipped until it has soft peaks, so It's basically whipped a little bit less than you would use for traditional whipping cream. And what I'm going to do is make the sauce first, and then I'm going to put it in here. I like to put the sauce in the bottom of a dish first when I'm mixing up a salad, because I think that's the best way to get it to coat everything that's in there. And I've got all my ingredients portioned out, so I'm going to move these things over to the side so that you can see what I'm doing here. So I have my whipping cream in here. I have my mayonnaise that's going to get mixed in with the whipping cream. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that as well. I have a sister who just cannot abide mayonnaise, and she actually sent me an article recently, and apparently that's not a unique thing for somebody not to really like mayonnaise. And I had mentioned to her that I was making this recipe today, and that I think you probably could use double the amount of whipping cream and no mayo if somebody's really a mayo hater. And she wrote back and said that she would use the Mexican crema, which is kind of like Mexican spin on sour cream. It's thinner than our American sour cream. It's actually more similar to creme fraiche. So you could definitely use something like that if you are one of the people who doesn't care for mayo. I've actually just put my curry powder in. I've got my chutney measured out here, so I'm going to put that in. I want to talk a little bit about curry powder and chutney. Both of them are actually from the UK. They're like English spins on things that were from India, which was a colony of the UK. Curry in England and chutney in England are very different than what you would find in India. They're kind of an adaptation, and it's more of a flavor that's probably a lot more mild than you would find in India. Curry technically is just a spice mixture, and the one that's in British is pretty standard and pretty mild compared to what you would find in India. And interestingly, they also took it to Japan, so there's a lot of Japanese curries that have a very similar flavor to the British curries. The Japanese curries actually come like in blocks that you dilute in water or liquid when you're making a curry sauce. I've just added my mustard into the sauce here, and I'm going to go ahead and add my green onions into there and get that all mixed together. And I'm going to go ahead and put that into the bowl into which I'm going to be preparing the salad. There's not a lot of curry in this recipe. It's just enough to give you the hint of the flavor. But the curry mixed together with the chutney is really kind of a different spin on the chicken salad, and I really like it. And everybody that I've given this to has liked it. So there's the sauce. That's the whipped cream, the mayonnaise, the curry powder, the chutney. The curry powder and the chutney are giving it a little bit of a light yellow or tan color, and the green onions are in there as well. And I'm going to scoop that into the bowl that I'm going to be mixing this into. I wanted to talk a little bit about chutney too. There's chutney in this, and the kind of chutney that I'm using is something that's called Major Grey's chutney. And Major Grey was a British officer who was stationed in India at some point. In India, chutney is basically a way of preserving fruit and vegetables. Basically, it's the fruit and equal parts of sugar and then a little bit of vinegar to keep it. So the chutneys that we get here, like Major Grey's chutney, are pretty much one-to-one sugar and fruit, and they're mostly made with mangoes. They could also have things like raisins added into them, and they could also have ginger. I'm going to go ahead and slice up the chicken that I cooked a little while ago. And this is going to be kind of a chunky chicken salad. A lot of chicken salads that you get here in the States, the chicken might even be shredded. This one I'm going to be just cutting it into little cubes. I would probably say they're about a ½ an inch to a third of an inch, and I'm just going to dump them right there into the bowl. You need to have 2 pounds of cooked chicken for this recipe. As I mentioned, I made a batch yesterday with rotisserie chicken, and the meat off of 2 chickens came out to just about 2 pounds. If the rotisserie chickens are bigger, like the ones that you might get at Costco, you might not need 2 whole chickens. For this one, I started out with about a little bit less than 2.5 pounds of raw chicken breast to end up with 2 pounds of cooked meat. I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of Marshall Field's. I'm a native Chicagoan, and Marshall Field's was the department store in town. Chicago actually has a great history of being a merchandising town. There's a lot of companies that were national merchandising companies that started in Chicago, including companies like Sears, Montgomery Ward's, and Spiegel. all of those actually started out being really big because they had the mail order. Chicago was kind of the center of the railroad world, so it became a big shipping center. And then we also have the Chicago River, which connects to Lake Michigan, which ultimately connects to the St. Louis Seaway. So it was a big area for shipping. Marshall Field was a person. There really was a Marshall Field. And he started out working with another very famous Chicagoan, Potter Palmer. And they had a small store that was a little bit west of what is downtown Chicago today. And at some point, Potter Palmer, who actually started the Palmer House Hotel in Chicago, was more into real estate investment. And he sold out his share in the business to Marshall Field. And Marshall Field brought in a man named Selfridge, who actually went on to open Selfridges in the UK. He was one of the marketers and merchandisers, and they built Marshall Field and Company. And it was one of the first department stores in the United States, and they pretty much had everything there. I'm adding my chopped celery and my chopped apples in here now so we can mix this up. Marshall Fields and his partner were very, very innovative merchandisers, and they came up with a lot of firsts. And one of the first things that they came up with in their department store was a tea room. Back in the 1800s, it was not proper for a woman to go into a restaurant without having a gentleman with her, and there was really no place for women to eat when they went shopping. So if they were having a big shopping day, they would have to go home for lunch. And so they came up with, one of the employees, realizing this, shared her lunch with her, which was a chicken pot pie. And this gave them the idea of having a tea room in there where ladies could eat without having to have a gentleman present. They still have the walnut room at Marshall Fields, and they still serve that chicken pie there in the tea room. Other things that they innovated, they were the first company to have a personal shopper. They were the first department store to install an escalator. They were the first department store to come up with the themed Christmas windows at Christmas time, and they actually animated them using mechanicals, even back in the late 1800s. I know in my family, every Thanksgiving after we finished our dinner, we would drive downtown to Chicago to look at the windows because they unveiled them on Thanksgiving night for the Christmas season. They also had kitchens at Marshall Fields. They made a lot of food and sold prepared food. For those of you who have been to Harrods in London, it wasn't quite that of an extravagant of a food hall, but it was more prepared things, and they had a lot of candies that they made on site. The ones that are famous are the Frango mints, which are little square chocolates with a mint flavor in them. Those are the original ones. There's a lot of variations of the flavors now, and it's kind of funny. They originally were called Franco mints with a C, and when General Franco took over in Spain, they changed the name from Franco mints to Frango mints. One of the things that they made was kind of a sugared pecan, and my dad worked close to there, and he would frequently come home with a little box of these pecans, and it's something that I figured out how to make. I may make it on one of these cooking videos one time, but it's basically like orange and sugar, which is reduced, and the pecans are tossed in it, and you let them dry, and the sugar kind of crystallizes around them. Marshall Fields was also the first department store that offered revolving credit. Their book department was the first kind of a book department that offered book signings from authors. And Marshall Fields is still very well known. They're on State Street, which at one time was the big shopping street in Chicago. There still are a lot of shops there, but they have a huge green clock that's on the corner of the building, and it was a favorite place to meet. People would say, "Meet me under the clock." So anyway, the salad is done. Having all the ingredients ready in advance, as I did, which is called mise en place, is a really good way to have things put together quickly. But this is the salad the way it is. You can see it's really thick and chunky. It's not like your traditional shredded chicken salad. So this would be the kind of thing that you would not put on a sandwich. You would serve it as an entree, maybe put it alongside a green salad, or maybe serve it on top of some lettuce leaves. You could also serve this maybe in a hollowed out avocado if it was a big enough one, or a hollowed out tomato, or serve it with some tomatoes on the side. And that is it for today. If anybody has any questions, please go ahead and drop them into the comment box. And I hope everybody has a safe and happy 4th of July, and I will be back here with you next Monday. One last thing, I would like to say, if anybody has any requests for anything that I've made for you, or anything that you'd like to see me make, please drop a comment in there and I'll see what I can do. I'm a pretty versatile chef. So thank you, and have a great weekend, everybody. See you next week.